Hola, 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 cage fighting connoisseurs. This is KidNativeBloodYellow.com, joined once again by that effing idiot Zane Simon, who got so many picks wrong in the vivisection, my eyes were bleeding with tears and the money he cost me. I can only imagine the gambling degenerates who actually bet on the fights, how they felt.
So
As
many? I got what?
Jamil Abdul Kamanavandov or whatever
I got the
just got
first two
toasted.
wrong,
Yeah, 0
and
for
then
2, boom,
I
boom.
changed my pick on Yakovlev after the Vivi because I felt the sudden fear of God from Gray Maynard stepping into the
I see.
octagon.
And how many Vivi viewers does that help?
Yeah, whatever. They're beyond help, most of them. Otherwise, I
True.
think I got everything right except for Chiesa, and I was picking Clark purely as homerism. So
I see, I see. Fair enough, fair enough. So we just watched Chad Mendes demolish Ricardo Lamas, 2 minutes 45-second TKO. We talked about Lamas being the opportunist who would jump on a stunned opponent, but it was all Mendes. I didn't even really see the first punch, and I didn't get a chance to see the highlights, or so I don't know if it was slick striking work that caught Lamas, or if it was just a fluky punch. But once he had him hurt, man, no let up, and a very dominant statement from the world's number 2 featherweight, Chad Mendes.
yeah, pretty clearly at this point. Yeah, he caught him on the top of the head in the pocket. I mean, Mendes at this point, he's a pretty slick striker. He's got nice tight boxing in close, so it's just one of those things that I mean, it gets back to the idea that Lamas is just the idea of him being an opportunist is all about like he's just otherwise not the cream of the crop at featherweight. He's top five because he's so great at jumping on guys, but he's not. If you put him in a straight like my boxing versus your boxing, my wrestling versus your wrestling against the other elite fighters in the division, he's not picking up wins.
No, no, he's kind of a jack of all trades. Now I'm wanting to see Chad Mendes versus Frankie Edgar. Looking
Yeah,
at the graphic of who the top 5 featherweights were, it jumped out at me. Here's two guys who both lost to Jose Aldo, who haven't fought each other, who are great fighters. What do you think of that matchup, and who would have the edge?
it would be a great fight. I'd give the edge to Mendes right now just because he's got less wear on him than Edgar does. He should still be kind of the fresher fighter, the guy more ready to excel at the elite level. But Edgar's, his game has been so tight and looked so good lately, so that definitely presents some problems in there.
Yeah, I think Mendes might have a little bit of the bright and shiny edge, but I also think Edgar might have more depth to him and is just a savvy cat and has been through everything. So hopefully that's a fight that can happen. Is Edgar booked? I don't even know this. Like, what's
Is
the
Edgar
range?
booked? Yeah, Edgar is taking on. Um, oh Jesus! Oh, he's fighting Uriah Faber
Ah, yes, yes. So
in
I
the
figure Edgar
Manila
will win that
headliner.
one, and that'll
Yeah,
set up a Mendez Edgar fight nicely,
yeah.
given that Faber and Mendez are teammates, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, so that's the show. Thanks. I hope everybody enjoyed it. The main event was no, but how about that co-main event? Alec, when it comes back from a first-round drubbing by George Masvidal to squeak through a decision that had him shouting "fuck you" at the crowd as they booed. I gave it to Al too, but I could see where a lot of people would. I mean, Masvidal definitely had the most dominant moments at the end of the first round.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those fights that I mean, I wouldn't have been broken up either way about the decision. I don't see any real controversy about it going either way. It just kind of puts like it feels like such a definitively George Masvidal fight though of like he looks
Easing off the gas pedal,
yep.
just letting it go away. He's too cool, too calm, too collected, too cocky. He thought he had it won in the first round and decided to coast to the second two. And it's a three round system. You can't do
Yeah.
that.
And it's the kind of thing that, I mean, it's the same losing to Ali Quinta, losing to Rustam Kabalov, losing to Gilbert Melendez, losing to Paul Daly, losing to Luis Palomino. I mean, like, he's done this throughout his career, and they're all tough fights, and they're all good fights, and he always looks great. He's still a perennial borderline top 15 fighter. But the consistency over, of him winning like 5 or 6 fights in a row has just never been there.
Especially once he gets against the elite competition, he just never steps it up. I feel like he's a guy who eases off the gas pedal when he ought to be slamming it. and very frustrating. But great performance from Iaquinta, who Masvidal had him stymied. I mean, Masvidal had, other than the leg kicks, Iaquinta was scoring with that, but it seemed like Iaquinta was really struggling to get inside on Masvidal. Masvidal was hurting him with the left hook, and Iaquinta really had to dig deep and figure out a game plan, and finally started tagging him with the right hand. And mostly, I think, won because he kept going for it, and Masvidal eased off.
Yeah, I mean it's really like I don't know. It's a performance that will probably get Iaquinta up into the top 15, maybe even borderline top 10, but it doesn't really answer a lot of questions for him. In kind of the same way as the Lozon fight, where he eventually looked pretty good by the end of it. There's still a lot of him getting hit a lot, getting hurt, and um, he digs deep. He's tough. He's got a variety of skills, but it's not a. It did feel like Masvidal lost this fight more than Iaquinta won it.
Yeah, it really did. Although you have to credit Al for digging deep and keeping coming forward, continuing to work the leg kicks, finding the right hand. I mean, he did everything he could. It's just I think he was not quite physically outmatched, although Masvidal seemed to have a reach advantage, but just the striking skill advantage was with Masvidal, and I just don't see Iaquinta beating top 10 competition very often. Same with Masvidal. So, there we go. Let's run from the bottom up for the rest of these, though. Middleweights, Ron Stallings and Justin Jones. Terrible fight. That's all I'm going to say about it. Stallings won by decision. Heavyweight, Timothy Johnson defeated Shamil Abdurakhimov, the guy that you and Victor were so high on. So
I
high
wasn't that
on just
high
days
on him.
ago.
I don't think he could
Nearly
ever.
days ago. Zane Simon couldn't
I
stop
don't even.
talking about this guy.
I don't think I'd ever have picked him to be a top 15 heavyweight ever. He's too small.
You just thought he could beat Timothy Johnson.
Yeah, I just don't think Timothy Johnson's any good. And I'm saying keeping that in the present tense because this is hardly the kind of fight that oh man, I've woken up to Timothy Johnson's thunders now,
This is really more about Shamil's limitations than it was about Johnson's. I mean,
yeah.
you knew what Johnson's assets were going in. He's a huge monster. He'll wear you down and beat you if you can't put him away early, and that's what happened.
Yeah, it's a size thing. I mean, Abdurakhimov is one of the smaller heavyweights out there, and Johnson is a big guy. He's a legit heavyweight-sized fighter, and he was able to hit one takedown, and that ended the fight almost instantly. I mean,
Yep. So, not scintillating, but not terrible. Much better than it could have been. And then that brings us to Alexander Yakovlev defeating Gray Maynard. Now, 2.5 rounds into this, I was going, hey, they found a guy so offensively impotent that he can't knock out Gray Maynard no matter how frail Gray is. And then he knocks him down
yeah.
immediately after I said that. So it was just sad. I mean, Yakovlev is, I think, the definition of offensive impotence. But Maynard had nothing for him. I mean, it's sad come down for a guy who was once one of the very best in the world.
Yeah, Yakovlev he's one of those guys who's technically he's a pretty good fighter everywhere, but except off his back, he's not great off his back, but he's just not physically strong enough to compete with most of the UFC and hurt most of them. But the truth is, like, he's technically sound enough that he's, that was what hit me as I was getting ready to watch these fights, and why I eventually was just like, okay, Yakovlev's going to win it, is because he's technically consistent enough that he was going to hit Maynard throughout the fight. And Maynard can't take that. Like, he just can't get hit that many times and win. And he can't.
Nope. And it's sad for a guy who was such a physical presence just a few years ago. I mean, the bully, he would just throw people around, pound people. He didn't have, early on in his career, he had a lot less striking technique, and he got more knockouts because he just had so much explosiveness. And I don't know, it's a testament to me about the serious physical trauma involved in getting knocked out. I mean, the way Edgar knocked him out in that second fight, it seems like it stole his chin and he never got it back. And then knockout after knockout after knockout, it just gets worse.
Yeah. He's on a serious decline, and I hope that this fight, more even than flash KOs, because I think a lot of fighters, when they get knocked out, they're just like, oh, I got caught. Time to go back and look. I'll be back in camp and working harder than ever, and I won't get caught next time. Hopefully, just getting beat up and outworked and out wrestled and out boxed everywhere by a guy like Yakovlev will start to make
Out
Maynard more.
wrestled. I mean, Gray Maynard was a serious NCAA collegiate wrestler and a very powerful one. And he had a style that translated really well for MMA. And and again and again he had position, he had front headlock, and Yakovlev would just bust out of it. And it was not that Gray Maynard of old, and it was sad to see. But enough about that. Let's move on to the fight that got Vinny Magali so excited he started throwing out homophobic and transphobic slurs left and right on Twitter. No, wait, this wasn't that fight. That was the Juliana Pena fight. This was the fight that Chaz Skelly said he'd rather staple his nuts to his forehead than watch this fight. And honestly, I like my nuts a lot more than that, and I'm afraid of staplers, but this fight was no fun to watch. Liz Carmouche got a grinding decision over Lauren Murphy.
Yeah, I don't think I necessarily would have given Carmouche that win. Um, but it's it's two similar fighters matching up, then they're both cage grinders, and that's never a fun thing when you have two cage grinder versus cage grinder.
Unless it just blows up into a Donnybrook, which sometimes can happen, but these guys, neither of them has the power really to have a Donnybrook. So, there was nowhere for this fight to go, and it didn't go anywhere. It was painfully dull.
Yeah, not a good
So,
fight.
enough about that. I mean, I could, if I had paid more close attention to it, but these spots kept forming between me and the screen, and I just, anyway, I think it was my nuts as I was trying to staple to my forehead. But anyway, so lightweight, Dustin Poirier, Carlos Diego Ferreira demolished him, KO 345 in. Actually, Ferreira looked pretty good up to the point he got demolished, I thought.
Yeah, they talked about him actually going to a real camp this time around, and that looks like it's made him a little more polished a striker. But he's still way too trusting of his striking for how wild and defensively porous he is. Like just a guy who's willing to put his head down and wing hooks at people. And Poirier's been around long enough that he can beat that guy, and
Yes,
that's what he showed.
he definitely can, and it's like, does that duck your head and whale overhands come in the water in Brazil or what? Because it seems like virtually every Brazilian grappler has that tendency. And a lot of them, it goes way back. I can think of so many that was their entire game on the feet, and it's just a very limited way to play. And Poirier looked good at lightweight. I don't know that he's ready to be a contender, but I'm eager to see more of him. So nice second birth from a guy who kind of, I wouldn't say washed out of the featherweight division, but Conor McGregor sent him on his way pretty emphatically. So, and then featherweight, Clay Guida and Robbie Peralta. My wife walked in on this fight, and she knows Clay Guida because once many years ago I bet my eyebrows on Roger Huerta versus Clay Guida, and she was very nervous and paid very close attention to that fight. Roger Huerta won, my eyebrows were safe, but Guida was such a ghost of himself. For one thing, he was balding. And then the post-fight run around the ring, I mean, in the old days, it looked like he had just snorted, several bumps of meth and was just, Energizer bunnying. This time, he looked like I was sucking wind as he sprinted around the ring afterwards. And so, not the Clay Guida of old, although a fine performance.
Yeah, I mean it's still the Clay Guida of today is still good enough to beat Robbie Peralta. That's kind of the thing, and that's really just Peralta. I was glad to hear he went to TriStar finally, apparently, but it's sort of like too little, too late for a guy who's been around as long as he has. He really needed to get to a good camp a lot earlier in his career, and then
There's
his
a lot
corner
of bad
wasn't even.
habits baked into his fighting style. I mean, baked in.
And then his corner wasn't even TriStar, so they're not even going to be giving him the advice that
He
he was
probably couldn't
getting.
afford to pay him to come down. Is my guess.
Maybe not. I don't know. I don't know what the situation there is. He's with Explode, and they're that's not that's kind of a weird camp. But
to say the least.
Yeah, but Guida, it fell right into what Guida does well. This is kind of a gimme win for Guida. It's hard to take anything away from it. He's still, I like that somewhere along the way, and probably by moving to alpha male, they've really given him the confidence to stand in and be more of the fighter he used to be. Whereas at Jackson's, they were starting to be like, no, just stay on the outside and move around and stay away from any contact whatsoever.
Yeah, they nearly sucked all the fun out of Clay Guida, which is a really amazing feat.
Yeah, so at least alpha male seems to have gotten that game plan, like gotten that confidence instilled back in him to win these kinds of fights easily. But I don't know, I don't see him climbing the ladder any higher than where he is right now, as sort of a gatekeeper outside at the edges of the top 15.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't see him improving. I mean, he's I think definitely on his physical decline, and it's time for some Rogaine son. Ask Kid Nate, I know. And so, Juliana Pena, Milana Dudevia, pretty impressive. Finished her right at the end of the first round, 3 minutes 59 seconds. I guess I had another minute to work with. I had no flaws with it, and this is the fight Vinny Magalhaes made such a jackass of himself, slandering Pena. But why give him the airtime? Pena deserves some credit.
Yeah, it's a great comeback for Pena. It's the comeback I was hoping to see out of her and looking for out of her, to see her just dominate Dudieva, because it's kind of like the Guida Peralta matchup. This was a fight that was just tailor made for Pena to wail on Dudieva and get a quick win, so she had to live up to that, and she did. I mean, that's good.
Yep, yeah, it was a good performance. I mean, the thing about women's bantamweight is most of them, I mean, she was in such a dominant position in the mount for a long time, and Dudevia was doing nothing right from her back, and it still took her a while to get the finish. It's a real distinction, I think, between the women's bantamweight and women's featherweight is in women's featherweight you would have seen that fight ended a lot more quickly, I think.
Well, and for people talking about, oh, Pena looks like the formation of an up and coming contender, we also did see Pena get thrown on her back immediately by Dudieva in the first head and arm throw clinch, and that's not a good fight, good way to fight, and Dudieva paid for it because she couldn't maintain control, but that should be a pretty bad sign for anyone looking for Pena to do well against Ronda Rousey.
Yeah, yeah. The game plan is pretty well pre-written there, and so I'll be surprised if Pena gets a shot. Anyway, and that brings us to Michael Chiesa versus Mitch Clark. Pretty one-sided blowout, dominating decision, 29-26 scores on the judges. So Chiesa, he got a point deducted? Is that what happened there?
Chiesa? I don't know. Yeah. That was just the scores they gave him for having back control. Although I think that when the card showed up, the buffer may have misread it, and it was only 129-26 and 229-28.
Okay, that makes more sense. But I mean, it just very dominant performance in the first two rounds, especially for Chiesa, and Mitch Clark just looked like he really had very little to offer his opponent.
Yeah, Clark did well later. I mean, the problem was that his big advantage in that fight for Clark was striking at range, and that's really not the natural part of his game. Yep. And he was able to beat Chiesa in the last round, but he wasn't able to do so consistently enough to finish him. I mean, it's not a fight that makes me feel a lot higher on Chiesa because, they're like, oh, look at his great striking variation. And it's like, yeah, but he almost got knocked out by a body shot in that third round. Like, let's not pay a lot of, let's not talk too well about his striking here. It's still ugly. Yeah,
it was ugly, and it didn't. I felt like this fight, in terms of merits of fight skill, should have been way down on the card. Anything past Yakovlev and Maynard was better than this fight, I thought. Anyway, so we talked about Ali Quinn and Masvidal. We talked about Mendes Lamas. We've talked about the card. Happy Easter, everybody. Do you have anything else to add, Zane?
It was a funnish card. It could have. I think that there weren't that many boring fights outside of Guida Peralta and Carmouche Murphy. It was all pretty decent, but yeah, it was. I'm glad it was over early. Like I'm glad to have the rest of my day ahead of me.
Yep, indeed, and the rest of the weekend. And next week we're heading to Poland for Gonzaga versus Krokop 2. A lot of unanswered questions in that bout. I have to say, a lot. So get in your MMA time machine and join us as we return to 2007. But we'll be back with all the fixins. Eugene will have Knuckle Up. I believe Tom Grant will have Inside the Guard. Connor and Patrick will have Heavy Hands. Then we'll have the Care Don't Care preview, the vivisections, the prospectus, yada, yada, yada. Onward and forward. The torture never stops. The octagon's never empty for long. All right, Zane. Thanks very much. Remember, subscribe to MMANation.com on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter at TheZaneSimon, at KidNate. Give us a like on this video. Read us on BloodAble.com. And adios, MMA aficionados. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Zane.
Yeah, no problem.